right. Hey, welcome everybody. Man, we have really been packing in some amazing episodes with some amazing guests, and we have another one on here today. Colonel retired Kevin Owens. So Colonel Owens served in 175 and 275, first enter in the regiment in 1985, where he served as a lieutenant and a captain, and then eventually came back to be the LNO, XO, and 3 within the 75th Ranger Regiment, eventually becoming the 275 Battalion Commander. And we have a lot of parallel stories we'll talk about there because we were there at the same time. And eventually being the 173rd over in Vicenza, Italy, commander as well with a deployment under his belt. Sir, it's an absolute honor to have you on Legends today. How you doing?
Mike, I'm doing real well, and I know other people have told you the same thing, but I insist that you address me as Kevin. I mean, if you can call General McChrystal Stan, you can certainly call me Kevin. And by the way, I've known General McChrystal for 35 years, and he's never invited me to call him Stan.
Wow. Okay. I didn't know that. And I got to be honest with you, when he said that, it took me, because we had a couple phone conversations before that and then following it. And I would say more times than not, I still called him sir.
I mean, honestly, a little bit of joking aside, but I would never comfortably call him Stan either. So yeah, I understand, but I am Kevin.
All right. Well, we'll see how it goes throughout the episode. So, well, you and we've talked quite a bit, ever since, I started Always in Pursuit podcast. You've reached out to me, you've given me encouragement, you've told me, how amazing, all those things are, which I really do appreciate. I disagree, but I'm the guy with the microphone, so I guess, it is what it is. But, I just wanted to kind of ask you, sir, when I was reading through that intro, that intro was, purposely written, we went back and forth a lot of different times on it. What was some of the kind of the feelings and the emotions as I read through that intro?
Of my time in the Rangers?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not, I will say that every single Ranger assignment that I had was incredibly distinct, but also shaped me as an officer for the rest of my life. And particularly my first assignment in 1st Ranger Battalion, that, I don't care how good a lieutenant is told he is in his first unit. Every lieutenant, I think, arrives at a Ranger Battalion with a degree of trepidation, how he's going to measure up. It's a organization whose reputation precedes itself, and there's a fine line between being confident and cocky. And I've seen lieutenants as both a peer and as a commander that sometimes forget that they came from being the big fish in the little pond. And so my first assignment in the Army was first the 504th and the 82nd. And I had, in my mind, always wanted to go to a Ranger Battalion. My father is an Army officer. He was Ranger qualified. I mean, his time, when he was growing up through the ranks was before they had Ranger Battalions. But, he certainly talked about them and, what being Ranger qualified to him meant. And I kind of internalized that. So it was just a goal I always had. And when I went to first the 504th, I thought I would be one of many, many lieutenants that had the same aspiration of joining, a Ranger Battalion. And come to find out, when I got there, I was the first one who had applied in years.
Oh, and, wow.
Yeah, it really kind of struck me. I just assumed I would be, again, competing with, many, many lieutenants. And in fact, not just within first of 504th, I think I was the first one that went to, or even applied to go to a Ranger Battalion from that entire brigade. The S3 we had at the time in that battalion was a guy named Major John Scroggins, and he had commanded Charlie 175 in the early 80s. And he kind of took me under his wing, talked to me about what his expectations of a lieutenant would be in the Rangers. And once I was on my way to going down there, he'd stop me in the quad area or whatever the case might be, and quiz me on a stanza of the Ranger Creed, making sure that I knew that part of it before I went down there. But when you're finally assigned there, and now I know I'm going to go. I've gone through the rope process. There's still a lot of, at least for me anyway, a lot of anxiety about how I'm going to fit in, how I'm going to measure up. I was fortunate, you have a visualization as a lieutenant of what a Ranger battalion is going to be. It's going to be physically hard. It's going to be standards based. It's going to be, well led through all echelons in the battalion. And they're going to be expert trainers. And I can say in every sense of the word that when I arrived at 1st Ranger Battalion, after I got my bearings, it fulfilled every one of those expectations that I had about what I thought I was going to experience. And it like I said at the beginning of it, Mike, and this is a pretty long answer to you, just how did you feel about the introduction?
No, it's fine.
Well, no, all I'm saying is that it fulfilled that, but more importantly, it shaped me for the rest of my almost 30 years in the Army.
Mm. So what was that, that feeling when you arrived at Ranger Regiment, and I've talked to a lot of officers that have had, prestigious careers within the 75th, and they almost attune it to, they realize this is the Army that they wanted to be a part of. This is why they joined, serving with these individuals, the NCOs and non-commissioned officers that are there. Like it just feels right. It feels like, they're where they belong, where home is.
Right. I mean, it's interesting. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I know there's an intimidation factor there. I mean, every single one of us goes through that.
Yeah. It's interesting because, on one hand, again, it's that fine line between being confident and being cocky. I mean, I felt like I belonged there, but you feel, and you should feel this, that there's an obligation to demonstrate you belong there every single day, whether it's the example you set, the decisions you make, the exercises you design, the decisions you make in training and or combat. You should feel that those are tests and things that, gates, and you are, on display, so to speak, every day of your existence there. I mean, there's a reason I think that the officer corps requires that an officer do that position successfully before he is assigned to a Ranger battalion. The only exception is the field grades. They just don't really have enough time in their career path to actually go in most senses, be a field grade somewhere and then come and do it again in the Ranger Regiment. It happens from time to time, but you have to be a proven lieutenant to be a proven, or to be a platoon leader in the Rangers. You have to be a proven company commander in order to do the same, and the same with the battalion commander. And from my perspective, obviously that's additional experience that you wouldn't find in regular infantry battalions. But for me, most importantly, it's because the Rangers deserve it. I mean, the Rangers deserve to have the best leadership, certainly in the NCO ranks, which they do, but also from the officer corps that's assigned to any given Ranger battalion.
I agree. And I think it's that maturity and professionalism that's offered, because of the individuals that get the honor of, going there, not only as officers. We talked to, Sergeant Major Donaldson, retired, too, about, the implementation of NCOs, having to go back through the RASP program as well. Right. And I think it's probably one of the smartest things that Ranger Regiment ever did, because, and it goes back into the very first, one of the very first things that you said was, you got to prove that you deserve to be there every single day. And that should apply to everybody. It doesn't matter whether you're a private or you're the sergeant major or the colonel. Like you gotta show that you deserve to be in the organization. Yeah. I haven't. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, no, the only other thing, and it was, kind of going back to, my goals as a new lieutenant going up to the 82nd, and why someone wants to go to the Rangers as an officer. I kind of want to flip that on its head, in that I've never understood why every infantry lieutenant in the entire Army doesn't want to serve in the Ranger Regiment.
I agree.
I mean, at least once. I mean, it's not,
yeah.
I was enormously lucky and fortunate that I got to serve multiple tours, but as I said earlier, had I served just one time as a lieutenant, I know I would have, I was going to be a better officer because of that experience. And just, it's the basic question. Why wouldn't everybody aspire to do that?
I think there's a, I've, it's something I've thought about, and, you've had your time where you've served outside the regiment, and there's great people out there in the rest of the Army. I think there's a lot of different reasons. One, things that they get told, about the Ranger Regiment, or how they're not eligible to go serve in the Ranger Regiment. And this applies for NCO or, enlisted and also officers. But then there's also the fear of failure, and some people just cannot push themselves, or they find an excuse not to do it because there's that chance that, hey, you might sit in that RASP board and they might not select you. They might say no, right, or you can't pass the physical events because you have a terrible day, you hurt your ankle. I mean, there's a million things that can happen, and I think, it's just the same reason. Why doesn't everybody go to Ranger School?
It's interesting because have you ever sat on a RASP board?
No, I have not. No.
Yeah. So I sat on RASP boards when I was a battalion XO, up at the regimental headquarters, and for NCOs, lieutenants, and captains, that was the threshold for the ones conducted at the regimental headquarters. And then I sat on a couple of RASP boards when I was a battalion commander for the field grades that are in CGSC that want to come to the Ranger Regiment. And I will tell you, it is a very humbling experience for a board member. At least it was for me, because
right,
you have an NCO, lieutenant, captain, major who's literally putting it all on the line. You know so much about that individual before they even walk in the door, and subject themselves to a battery of questions about their tactical and technical proficiency, their ethical foundations, their leadership traits, what's important to them. It's really an amazing process. And even if not selected, I had a great deal of admiration for those that just even walked into the room to start that, let alone go and now perform it in reality in the unit they're assigned to if they're selected.
Yeah. What was rope like when you went through in 1985? I know it's changed quite a bit, so I've never asked.
It's not, it was a, first off, the physical parts of it were the foundations of, our
right,
physical standards. The APFT at the time, a 12-mile road march, and then a 5-mile run. And, all those things were just the standards which we endured for a long time in the Rangers. So that part of it was fine. Don't get me wrong, you're doing hard PT every single day, and the rope cadre were all in fantastic shape, and they were designed to smoke your bag, which was fine. And they did that on occasion, but it was about a 2-week process. Officers and NCOs were going through it together, but there was no culminating board process that, you experience now. Otherwise I wouldn't be talking to you.
I don't know about that.
Yeah. But it was 2 weeks of really, it was called ROPE, Ranger Orientation Program. And it was exactly that, some history, but you went out and qualified with your weapon. You made a couple of not airborne operations, but a couple of jumps, particularly for those. I was coming from the 82nd, but a handful of folks aren't.
Right.
A lot of lieutenants coming from Korea. So it was a gut check in a sense physically, but it was the graduation requirements were those established physical standards that the Ranger Regiment has always used.
Well, and the reason I asked is you going through in 1985, and then obviously sitting on a lot of boards as a field grade, and then as a battalion commander, later on in your career, and just the stark difference between the two processes. The physical standards were always there, but just how it evolved and how it changed. I'd love for you to talk about that, and how that actually was a very important part of where the Ranger Regiment would go, in the GWAT.
Yeah, it's interesting because, and you've seen, the second evolution of how that program has evolved. And I think in one of the things I do remember, I remember a lot of things about our time together in Second Ranger, but one of the things that always jumped out is the the proficiency, the readiness, and the physical fitness of new Rangers coming into the battalions. And it was not unique to 275. I mean, all the battalions kind of had a similar comment about they're not showing up as prepared as they used to be, et cetera. And so really it was an expectation that they came in a little bit more proficient in demolitions, more proficient in advanced marksmanship. They'd actually can tactically assemble on a drop zone and move out in the appropriate direction. And that's why I think it has over time evolved into a pretty comprehensive, longer process that delivers Rangers to the respective battalions that are more, better prepared to enter at a run rather than maybe a walk.
Yeah.
That I didn't experience, and I'd be interested to see if that in fact bore the fruit that it was designed to.
Yeah. So, the 8-week, RASP process for RASP 1, it definitely has changed the caliber of the Rangers. They show up with, very good marksmanship fundamentals drilled into their head. They understand, basic things. They're very quickly ready to go to Ranger school is kind of what I noticed. I think there could be a little bit more, done, this was back when I was a first sergeant, that I felt that, a little bit of the weeding process wasn't as good, but, now it's continued to evolve, so now, it just continues to get better and better, and there's there's boards throughout with the RASP cadre that they do like intermittently through, they do peer evals all the way through, so there's really a lot more going into it. We just talked to, the 19th, regimental sergeant major, Kurt Donaldson, and he was talking about, those Rangers, when they would show up, their marksmanship ability, it was blowing us out of the water, comparatively when we were privates. Like, I remember my first live fire, it wasn't anything great, but these guys, they know how to not only handle the M4, but if they also have a crew serve weapon, they know what they're doing and the fundamentals are drilled into their head. But it also, it had to evolve because we were getting these guys and we were deploying, it wasn't a matter of if, it was a matter of, hey, where are we at in the training cycle, and during some of those, years, we got better at it. The battalion that was coming back from the deployment would have, new Rangers arriving, when we would get back from the deployment. So they would go through the whole deployment cycle. But there was many times, throughout, the years where if we were on a surge, we'd get a guy like a week before, or we were even getting guys while we were deployed, because all the deployments were predictable, but the surges were not. So, and that constantly just threw things, for a loop, and then obviously Iraq kicking off, that obviously just even added more to it, so, but it got better. It really did get better over time.
Yeah. And that's the process, I mean, the Ranger Regiment, if it's anything, is an evolving learning organization. And,
yes.
For those who join the Ranger Regiment, well, not the Ranger Regiment, that joined 1st or 2nd Ranger Battalion before the regiment, they went through an indoctrination selection process that was done at their respective battalion locations. And, talking to those guys who did, I mean, Hugh Roberts, Mike Hall, it was not, it was a gut check from day one to the time that they were actually turned over to their respective companies within those battalions. But to watch it evolve over time to its current incarnation is pretty amazing. And it's based on, the organization's ability to adapt, identify what its requirements are for the current fight, and produce that Ranger that will deliver on what it needs to fit in and accomplish our missions.
Yeah. Well, I think, that's a hallmark of the organization is how much it does evolve, and it continues to change and refine process. Like you even go back even further, like Sergeant Major Merritt, he talked about how he got to Ranger Regiment, and basically like a first sergeant showed up, and he was told to be at some stadium, and this first sergeant gave him a PT test, he did the PT test, he did the 5 mile run, said, hey, show up tomorrow, with your ruck, and you're going to do this 12-mile road march, finish that. And the guy's like, all right, hey, congratulations, you're going to be in the Ranger Regiment now. And he's like, okay, like this first sergeant like hired him, but that's because they were trying to stand everything up also.
Yeah.
So, we talk about, and you and I have had a lot of conversations, but, your opportunity to be a company commander. And I think one thing that has always stood out in your mind as a company commander in the Ranger Regiment is how many just amazing individuals you had in that company. And I'll highlight one name, and I know there's a lot more of just, quality leaders that came out of that company. Daryl Thies being one, and there's numerous others. But who have went off and done great things, for the Ranger Regiment, but then also for the Army as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's not. I felt as an officer, I self-actualized as a company commander, and I was a company commander in the 82nd also before.
Right.
I came to 2nd Ranger Battalion, and so I felt, particularly in the airborne operations thing and live fires and how to conduct those. I did feel pretty confident about it, but it also makes it, I don't want to say easy, but that you could the difference between being a company commander in the 82nd, and I was proud and thought I had a good outfit, and then being a company commander in 2nd Ranger Battalion, while maybe not as stark as night and day, it's pretty damn close. And when you have, one of my platoon sergeants was Hugh Roberts. Another platoon sergeant was Randy Inman.
Oh, wow.
Daryl Thies was a gunner. I mean, he was a machine gunner. And you can see where all of these Rangers of the different ranks, ended up. And the reason they really ended up where they did and didn't even go farther is because they decided that of their own.
Right.
All 3 of those guys, would have been sergeant majors at the division level and maybe beyond had they aspired to do that. But
yeah, I agree.
Yeah, so it's really just a question of talent and experience that makes being a Ranger company commander a lot more productive than perhaps it was in my previous command. I mean, don't get me wrong, I enjoyed it. I mean, it was gratifying in one sense because even as a company commander, I'm doing a lot more teaching in the 82nd than I was in Alpha Company 2nd Ranger Battalion, and particularly coming right out of my experience in 1st Ranger Battalion, where live firing was just such a core competency, and being able to do that when you go to a unit like the 82nd, while of course they put a premium on it, it's just done to a different level of intensity and standard in the Rangers.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, the continuity of the NCOs is one part that just always makes that possible within the Ranger Regiment too.
Absolutely. I mean, it's not, I mean, the deal, Mike. I mean, a Ranger NCO, and I know it's changed over the years and for good reasons. And I think for all the right reasons, but during my time there, a Ranger NCO generally never left unless he wanted to, or, circumstances of misconduct, but it was
right.
I mean, Randy Inman PCS from Fort Lewis for the first time in his life when he went to the Sergeant Major Academy. I mean, come on. And by the way, you know what his follow-on assignment was, right?
Yeah.
Right back to 275. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, he should have had a couple more broadening assignments under his belt. I don't know.
Yeah. I give Bernie Felino shit all the time because he did like 23 and a half years in the 75th. And I'm pretty sure almost all of that, except for 1 year or like 13 months of it, was in 175. So yeah.
Yeah. It's not fair.
No, it's not. Well, I got a question. There's 2 kind of questions about that, as your time as a company commander, but, we are sitting down with Daryl Thies, in the future. I don't know when that's going to be. We're going back and forth right now. He's a busy man, but what was he like as a gunner? Was he as intense and, what everybody else remembers him like?
100%. I mean, it's not, from my time with him, and, it started when he was an M60 gunner. We got the 240 Bravos during my time as a company commander, but he was a machine gunner. And then I come back and he's a platoon sergeant in Bravo Company. He is always been an intense individual, focused on, standards, focused on precise execution of whatever his tasks might be. When he was a gunner, it was pretty obvious. And when he was a platoon sergeant, it was, I have to say the least, his span precipitously expanded.
Right.
But yes, the individual has been consistent in his character, his professionalism, and his proficiency since I've ever served with him before.
Yeah, absolutely.
Kind of a no nonsense guy, but he still likes to be around people who can have fun.
Yeah, no, he does.
Yeah.
And was it weird to come back? You had Hugh Roberts, as a platoon sergeant, come back and serving with him as a command team.
Actually, so when I was commanding a battalion in Hawaii in the 25th ID, I got notified, hey, you've been selected to command a Ranger battalion, and it was, to say the least, made my day.
Right.
You don't know where you're going. Craig Nixon was in commanding his battalion in Korea at the time. He knew, because he already knew he was going to go to 3rd Ranger Battalion. So I was either going to go to 175 or 275. I was elated with either outcome. Ken Keene was the RCO at the time. I had been his S3 and XO in 175, and he called me and goes, hey, we haven't determined the slate. Tony Thomas was the other guy selected. Do you have any preference, or do you have any considerations for where you would want to go? And I laid out a couple of family related reasons, and not that I was trying to deceive my boss, but laid out a couple of family reasons. We had 4 young kids at the time, and life and opportunities for them, knowing what Fort Lewis was like and knowing what Hunter Army Airfield was like, was what I really wanted to kind of tell him why I wanted to go to 275 more than any other reason, is because Hugh Roberts was the sergeant major. That really, and I've never told him that, but that was my real, at least from a battalion and professional standpoint, why I wanted to go to 2nd Ranger Battalion.
Yeah, I don't blame him. He was an amazing guy.
Yeah, I mean, it's not, it's interesting. And I think, I certainly look back on our time. I mean, we keep in touch today, not as often as, I would like, but, if I texted him today, we'd respond to each other. But what I loved about Hugh Roberts is, I mean, he was a hard man. He was a standards-based guy, but he was also incredibly approachable for any rank. I mean, it wasn't like, oh God, here comes the sergeant major. But the other thing I really respected about him was the amount of ground he could cover. What I mean by that is he couldn't care less where I am in the fight or the airfield siege or whatever. He knew where he had to be to see what was going on in that battalion.
Yeah.
And he just knew, he had his finger on the pulse, in my opinion.
Yeah, he did. I would disagree though that he was approachable. He'd probably give me the worst ass chewing I've ever had as a corporal. But we already covered that in the Legends episode with him, and I was
but I mean, the thing about it is he forgot about it as soon as you did. And now it might have taken you a lot longer to forget about it. But it was not. He wasn't looking for round 2 when he saw Burke walking across the quad the next day.
No, I will say that you're 100% right in that fact. Yes, he is. But that's awesome. Well, one thing that I've talked about, sir, and I've already kind of talked about that is your time at 275 as a battalion commander. I mean, the opportunity to serve as a battalion commander is remarkable, for anybody. But you were there, when September 11th happened as a battalion commander at 275, and we were in Germany at the time. Which we'll get into that. I know we want to have a discussion about that, about the jump into Rhino. But you talk about all your time leading up, to serving in the Army, multiple, smaller conflicts. You got Panama, Somalia happens, Desert Storm, all this different kind of stuff. But for the most part, they're very, very small kind of conflicts, as we go through the 80s and the 90s. And then, September 11th happens and you're a battalion commander. We're in Germany when the towers fall, and we're going into the box, the same day, just kind of the feelings and, the emotions surrounding that. And what I've talked about, and I told you about, was you stood in front of us, and you had the Times magazine, which on the cover was, the photo of, the second plane hitting the World Trade Center, and gave probably a speech that I don't know about everybody else, and I've never asked anybody, but you talked to us about, how dare they hit us, basically on our home turf. And no matter what happens, we're going to take the fight to the enemy. And, the conviction, the emotion, the power of your words is something that I carried with me for many, many years, through dark days and tough days and everything else in the global war on terrorism. So I would love for you to just kind of talk about, being a battalion commander when all these events happen.
Well, I mean, one thing, probably my feelings weren't very different from anybody across the Army, and certainly within the Ranger Regiment. Not my legacy, but my time in the Ranger Regiment up to that point had been, I'd served in all the right units at perhaps all the wrong times. I arrived at 2nd Ranger Battalion as a captain 2 months after they returned from Panama. Then of course, Saddam Hussein invades Kuwait, and I said, okay, even if I didn't want to go, we're all going, just because the whole army was going. And of course, for the most part, the Ranger Regiment was left out of that entire campaign. It happened so quickly, but that aside, there perhaps wasn't really a viable role for what needed to be done that involved the Ranger Regiment. Somalia happened, and that was a 3rd Ranger Battalion effort. By things lined up on the readiness posture, but now we're in, it was Alpha Company deployed as a separate thing to Jordan, and then Bravo Company and Charlie Company in the battalion headquarters were in Germany for a training exercise. And the one thing I'll never forget is a lot of the NCOs, and maybe I felt the same way, I just didn't display it the same way, we were kind of walking around kicking rocks because they thought we were going to miss it, and it's one of those where everybody, based on previous experience for Ranger operations, you could measure them in days, maybe a week,
right?
And then they were successfully completed. So that's the mindset all of us had there, that if you're not first in the chute, then
it ain't going to happen.
Yeah, it's just not going to happen. And of course, 20 plus years later, we finally, pulled out of all of our efforts over there. So those things were certainly running through my mind. But I think by the time we left, I started getting indications that this was going to, as it of course panned out, going to be a lot longer effort, and that we were going to go. What really came into play for 2nd Ranger Battalion, and my thought process as a battalion commander is, well, 375 jumped most of the battalion into Rhino, and when they were relieved by 175, it was only a company plus in the battalion headquarters. And that's what we went over there initially postured to do, is to relieve them and kind of just sustain the effort they had. And that's a hard thing to do, because again, you just don't know how long these things are going to happen. And, it's one thing across a regiment or a division. It's another thing across just a Ranger Battalion to say, okay, Bravo Company, you're going, everybody else is going to not. And that certainly was, weighing on my mind about what that would be like if that's in fact how it just turned out. Fortunately, by the time we went over there, the entire battalion did arrive at Afghanistan.
Yeah.
But
I remember there was, because, Bravo Company, I was in Bravo Company, and that's a company that deployed. And I will tell you that, man, there were some angry individuals at first, because everybody, and that was the sentiment. Everybody thought they were going to miss it, that it was going to be over. And if you didn't get that first deployment, then there wasn't going to be a second one, and a lot of us just didn't know,
Yeah. I mean, it was, when we came back and then we started training, to deploy. And I don't know if you remember or not, but we went out to Yakima. We were doing company live fires there. They weren't multi-lats. It was just literally, just company night attack live fires
Yes,
We
I do
actually, a
remember.
friend of mine was commanded an artillery battalion there at Fort Lewis, and they were providing the fire support for them, and they were good operations. And it was at the conclusion of those live fires, I brought all the company commanders in and the first sergeants and obviously Hugh Roberts, and told them who was going to deploy. And again, at that time, I only thought it was going to be Bravo Company. And it was a hard thing to tell them. I mean,
Yeah.
because I could certainly feel for them as company commanders, and also having the unfortunate thing to go and tell a company's worth of Rangers that, hey, we're standing by and we may never go.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
It's a tough decision to make. That's for sure. But you made the right decision. I mean, Bravo Company. I mean, come on. That was obvious.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thanks. So, one guy who agrees well, and then every other Ranger Bravo Company at the time, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, for sure, think about it though. I mean, and there's obviously tons of other, just great Rangers, but the platoon sergeants, for instance, at Bravo Company was Chuck Albertson,
Yeah.
Daryl Thies, and Bernie Felino,
Yeah.
and who was the first sergeant?
Pete Rothke.
Yeah, Pete Rothke.
He's the reason I picked Bravo Company.
Really?
No. Well, I mean, he's certainly one of them. He's one of 150.
All right, fair.
Yeah.
Okay, Pete Rothke. Yep, that's right. He was the first one. I forgot. So,
How could you?
wow, that's true.
I mean, that guy, real quickly, is when we were on that, when we're talking about the jump into Germany, so we load the C-17s at McCord. Rothke's still an ops sergeant, and he's my jump master. And we're flying all the way over there, in flight, obviously in flight rigging, but also in flight refueling to get us there. And Rothke, so we're just laying out, sleeping and stuff, and he brings his typical Burger King, super meal with him, and that thing transits the entire globe, gets south, and he doesn't even start to eat it until halfway through that long infill march we did to those objectives. And I mean, there's nothing that guy couldn't eat. I mean, he has a billy goat like stomach that is unbelievable.
He pulled out a pizza one time in Winter Surge, and I was like, "Where in the hell did you get Domino's for sergeant?" Right. He's like, "Oh, I got this like before we even deployed."
Yeah,
I'm like, "That was like a month ago."
Right. Yeah, no, exactly. It's what is wrong with this guy? But didn't even phase him.
No, it did not. So Gabe Huff actually had a funny story about him that he like left something in a D bag, like food in a D bag, and it started to spoil and like smell, and he couldn't figure out what it was until he opened up his D bag and he found like all this moldy food in there.
That just meant Pete ate it faster.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, no kidding. Well, I know we've already had a conversation about this, but the decision for 275 not to jump into Afghanistan and instead of being 375 into Rhino, I know you have some thoughts on that.
Well, okay, I know we talked about this. And again, there's you will certainly appreciate separating, also my emotions and what I wanted to do with Second Ranger Battalion vice the realities, right? I mean, when you interviewed General Votel, I mean, he gave the right answer.
Yeah, he did.
That's why we have RF1. That's why, he was also talking about the tier alignment, all those types of things factored into it. That said, well, I mean, the only thing I guess I was a little disappointed that if you recall how hyper sensitive and secretive everything was about that, as it should be. This is the first thing, and we want to control all information and planning and stuff. So from my perspective, not that I'm biased, that if you have an entire Ranger battalion deployed between Germany and Jordan and are in touch with no one and have already established that their absence is well understood, what better way of fulfilling that secretive OPSEC posture than to have us, go in first? We're already there. We got all of our equipment. We're isolated, et cetera, et cetera. That did run through my mind and was given zero consideration when, by anybody of importance. But it's nice to think back on it every once in a while.
Yeah, well, we had to put him in General McChrystal, feet into the fire and ask him the question,
Well, hotel, but yeah, it was
Yeah.
no. I remember you. I remember I listened to that interview, and then he gave the correct answer that no one appreciates in Second Ranger Battalion at the time.
No, well, and I mean, but it goes back into, you talk to, Sergeant Major Roberts that, 275 was sick and tired of being left out of things, ever since Panama, because Desert Storm, Somalia, like all these different alerts had happened, Haiti, all this stuff. Like 275 was pretty disgruntled about this, and we didn't know what we know now, that it was going to be 20 years worth of fighting. So
yeah,
it was definitely understandable. But finally 275, February of 2002, we get called, and we head over for the deployment, and being the battalion commander, for leading us into that effort, and the just the thoughts and the kind of the emotions surrounding that.
it was interesting because you certainly have greater expectations of activity than in fact we experienced, and
Right.
The Horribor had already happened. Roberts Ridge with 175 and the SEALs had already happened. And then we arrive, and again, we arrive with the battalion headquarters and Bravo Company. And I was a little surprised by not of the Ranger Regiment, because the headquarters wasn't over there, but the higher command there, the reluctance just to get out and start doing things. And I realize, you tell somebody presence patrols, and they go, what the hell does that mean? All you're doing is walking around and trying to stir up activity. And I would submit, yeah. I mean, it's not, there's something, with the absence of a lot of intelligence. I mean, some of it's just created by friendly activities in and around areas. And we weren't, that's how you determine things. So that part of me was a little surprised and even disappointed. But
Right.
I think that we eventually at least were able to establish some of these forward posts that served as the true COBs and FOBs for future Ranger operations and or future conventional operations that were truly created by first Bravo Company, then Charlie Company, and then ultimately Alpha Company. We were able to roll them in. And the other thing, and again, this is from a battalion commander standpoint, as important to me as anything during that period was successfully getting the entire battalion deployed to Afghanistan. And I don't want to sound like it's just checking a block, but it was something that I thought about a lot. And it wasn't because of me. I mean, it wasn't, hey, frankly, I didn't have the authority to make that decision. It was really guys like at the time, Colonel Frank Kearney, who was the J3 of JSOC, who I think was able to make that happen. And that became the enduring footprint for quite a while in Afghanistan.
Yeah, for a long time. Yeah.
Well, I'm not. I'm talking about. In other words, it wasn't just. Third Ranger Battalion came and relieved us in its entirety.
Right. Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah, that makes sense.
But let me ask you this. You're a team leader in BCO. What was going through your mind when we were going over there, and what didn't happen?
Yeah, we've talked about it, in some of the episodes. That deployment was a whole lot of, excitement and trepidations and anxiety and everything, followed by just like, oh wow, what the hell are we doing here? Like, just sitting around, because even like going to the Air Force Base Oman first, like we didn't even know that,
Right.
I didn't know that, as a team leader. Maybe my platoon sergeant did, but I didn't know that. So we thought like, as soon as we get off the planes, like we're going to be in a gunfight,
Right.
And then, we show up there and they're like, hey, you can't even take your weapons with you. Like you're not in Afghanistan yet, and then we take the C-130s and we show up to Kandahar, and, we just, there wasn't a whole lot to do there. There wasn't a whole lot going on. And then eventually, is when we went out to Shkin and we did some of the other stuff. And then that's when, okay. But even that was short lived. When we took that over for 1 Bravo, We were only there like maybe a month, maybe a little bit longer. I don't quite remember. And then we were back from the deployment. We sat in Bagram. We did a couple more things. My squad. I don't remember if you remember Josh Wheeler.
Of course I do.
Yeah. So he was my squad leader. So
Right.
for a lot of different reasons, because for One Bravo was doing a lot of the stuff. We were getting attached to them, and we were doing a lot of different missions than the rest of the company was doing. We were the squad that got selected for a lot of that stuff. So we did a lot, but none of it was the Mongolian horde firefight that we thought we were all going to be a part of. But again, time now we can look back and we could go, careful what you wish for, because you definitely got, the years that followed and the deployments that followed were, definitely a lot more kinetic.
Yeah, I would really like to meet the person who claimed in 2002 that we were going to be there for 20 years.
Yeah, right.
It's not, I mean, and I think that was honestly a little bit, I hope I don't sound too critical of the, really it was, the higher command there, but I think that we'd kind of exhausted what we thought we were going to be able to contribute to that theater. And probably at that level, they may have already been privy to, by the way, in about a year, we're going to go to a different country.
Right.
So they're trying to preserve effort in an area where, we might not have a truly an effective role anymore.
Well, just to show how ignorant we were, back then, I went on a run with Josh Wheeler, Casey Cassavant, and Chuck Albertson around the Kandahar airfield one day.
Yeah,
so we were around this airfield, and I remember we stopped and we were talking to one of the guards, up in the post, probably a guy from 101st, I don't quite remember. And we got on this conversation about like, a decade from now, we'll probably, be coming back here for vacation because it'll be some kind of resort or something like that. Like after we beat the Taliban and the Taliban's gone,
right.
Afghanistan.
How's that going?
Yeah, right. Afghanistan will be like a destination for tourists. And I'm like, I mean, we literally had this conversation, and boy, we were wrong.
Wait till they get some of us. That's right.
But it just shows what we didn't know back
right.
then, and we
Absolutely
did not understand. So many deployments later. I wanted to ask you about the high and tights. You said you talked about you sent me a text and you said we actually had a conversation before the final the decision was made. Couple years down the road, I don't even remember what year we finally made the decision to go away from the high and tights, where all the battalions were asked what their vote was, is if we should go to a different standard or if we should keep the high and tights.
I mean, I think shortly after Joe Votel took command of the Ranger Regiment, he had a VTC with all the battalion command teams. And I mean, there were many things we talked about, but one of them was, do we want to go to Army standards for the haircut or keep the high and tight? And it was just simply interesting because all three infantry Ranger battalions are more similar than they're not. But that said, there's still some kind of long-standing reputations of the battalions. I mean, First Ranger Battalion, I think, will forever be thought of as the kind of the lockstep, regimented, uncompromising battalion. 275 is out there alone and unafraid at Fort Lewis and kind of creates their own rules. And then 375 is probably a hybrid of those. And then kind of with that, Joe Votel and Wally Rackow was the RSM at the time. First Ranger Battalion had Tony Thomas and Doug Greenway. It was Owens and Roberts in 275, and then 375. Steve Bannock had taken command from Craig Nixon, and Jay Brimston was his sergeant major. And Jay had been my ops sergeant when I was a battalion S3 in 175. And so Votel goes around the horn. Okay, how do you vote? And it was, so 175 says we need to get rid of the high and tights. Its utility, its purpose, whatever the case might be, is done. 375 also wanted to get rid of it. 275, and Hugh and I both of our own opinion said, no, we need to keep it. The point I made was there are very few, in my opinion, true traditions and standards left in the Army, and this is at that time.
Right.
And
you got to look through it.
All of them reside in the Ranger Regiment, and
right.
it's of course there's no purpose to. I mean, I was a 41-year-old man. I don't need to shave my head every single weekend for Monday morning's inspection. But it's just when you think of a Ranger, a U.S. Army Ranger, good, bad, or indifferent, the high and tight comes with it. And then I was kind of surprised, but the regimental command team of Votel and Rackow voted to keep the high and tight. They considered themselves the deciding vote, even though it was 2-2. So that's the way. Now, let me. Here's my caveat.
Okay.
There's no better regimental command team than Craig Nixon and Greg Birch, and they made the absolute right decision for the regiment that they commanded, and for all the right reasons. I'm not questioning that at all. I mean, to say now, hey, I want, publicly say, yeah, I really would be on the wrong side of the high and tight argument. I mean, I'd probably be recalled to active duty long enough to shave the side of my head. And, so I'm not even suggesting that, but I did kind of find it fascinating at the time how each of the battalion command groups landed on that issue.
Yeah, I was surprised by the votes. I was actually a little.
But here's so when I was a lieutenant in Bravo Company 1st Ranger Battalion, the first sergeant at the time was a guy named Sam Spears, and he is a plank holder in 175. And shoot, by the time I arrived there, he'd probably been in 175 for like 8 straight years. Vietnam vet before that, jumped into Grenada with them, and just one of the best leaders and just kind of a sage man that I'd ever been around. And I remember talking to him about, standards and what it was like before there was a regimental headquarters and now. And, people have this misconception that, both when you had 1st and 2nd Ranger Battalion, it was, everybody had a high and tight. And that's really, that was not a standard until they created the Ranger Regimental Headquarters. And if you look at old yearbooks of either battalion, you'll see, I don't know, I can't put a percentage on it, but it was probably about half of the Rangers just had high and tights. The other half, had something kind of close, but not quite. But Sam Spears said something that to me resonated, and he goes, the standard, such as it was, used to be this: it can't be any longer than the battalion commanders, and it can't be any shorter than the sergeant majors. And that just tells people you got to figure it out every 2 years.
I'd be curious to look back at those yearbooks though and see if any Rangers had mustaches.
That would be a stretch. I think I don't know if they ever had those.
I don't know if they did either. That's funny. It's an interesting debate to have, but I think there was a time where it was needed, and then there was a time where adaptations and changes need to be, and it just, again, it goes into the whole evolution thing. There was lots of evolutions that the Ranger Regiment needed to make, and it just made sense at the time. So
right.
And there was definitely, when the decision was made to grow out the hair, there was definitely some excess hair out there. That's for sure.
I mean, that's the other thing is when you tell a bunch of young Rangers, hey, we're going to adopt the Army standard for haircut, what they really hear is relaxed grooming standards.
Yeah, it is.
And there's a difference.
There is. There absolutely is a difference. Yeah, that's a good point. So, after your time as a 275 commander, you leave the Ranger Regiment. Obviously you never know, but that ended up being your last time serving in the Ranger Regiment. But you still went on and had an amazing career, serving at the 173rd, as a commander of the 173rd, which is, we talked about that, how that's kind of hey, you're not going to be the regimental commander, so you get the 173rd, but, it's still an amazing organization. But, there's 2 questions, and I'll ask it, at different times, but observing the Ranger Regiment from the outside now, as, in the 173rd, and, still having guys that came over there from the Ranger Regiment and serving as well, and watching it as the GWAT developed.
Well, first off, while obviously still had a connection, so to speak, with the Ranger Regiment from my previous experience. I mean, I also had a job to do, and that was command an airborne brigade that was preparing to deploy to Afghanistan for our deployment. What I, again, we've said this in our earlier conversation, Mike, that what it did for me, I felt, and did for also, you could see an infusion of a lot of Ranger Battalion guys over in Italy with me is is put a premium on our standards, put a premium on our readiness, put, live fire was an important aspect of it, and just preparing to go fight in Afghanistan for the year that we did. But my foundation of how to approach those things was built in the Ranger Regiment. And I felt particularly comfortable going into the 173rd with that experience in order to get them ready for what we're about to do also.
Yeah. All right, sir. So, 173rd, you did some time in, JSOC as well. Your exit out of the military, what was the decision to, kind of leave the military and, not continue to serve? What was your decision to do all that?
I think every soldier, regardless of what rank they are, knows when it's time to leave. And
they should. Yeah, I agree. They should. I think some don't come to that realization, but I agree.
Yeah, perhaps. And I guess I always, even when I first came in the Army, I had no idea how long I was going to stay, whether it was going to be for 3 years or 30 years.
Right.
And I just always told myself that there were simply just two criteria, and this is not unique, but one is if I'm still making a contribution in some way to, the Army, and two, I'm still enjoying it.
Yeah.
And while I felt to a degree in my last assignment in the Army, I was making a contribution, it really wasn't particularly fun. I mean, it was, ironically, Mike, it was a particularly easy job. So, you could have said, well, who cares? You're just, you're drawing a paycheck. But I lacked purpose. And because I lacked purpose, it was no longer enjoyable. And because of that, it just, so at 28 years, I just decided to go ahead and retire from the Army.
I definitely want to ask you about, what you're doing now, but before we do, I want to still kind of hover over, your time in the 75th. And when I reached out to you, to come out onto Legends, you had a little bit of a hesitation. What do you think the hesitation was, to want to come on and be a guest on the podcast? I know we all view ourselves,
Right.
We see the guest list and everything else. And I mean, I can make the same argument. Why the hell am I the host of this? Am I even up to snuff to be a host of, such a prestigious, podcast with, the guests that are on here and everything else? I can make the same argument. But I shared a story with you and an impact that you made on me. And, that definitely helped, kind of sway your decision, to come on here. But there's people that remember you fondly and that you were pivotal to their Ranger career.
Yeah. My assumption is you asked me to be a guest on this because I'm obviously a paid subscriber to your podcast. And my dues are up for renewal.
That is not it.
So Mike, let me reassure you, I'll go ahead and subscribe for another year. Okay?
That is definitely not.
I mean, like all your previous guests have said, I mean, the word legends is pretty daunting, and it can be even off-putting, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And it goes back to also, what I said earlier. I mean, the fine line between being confident and cocky. But as I said, I think that while I was confident that I belonged, I was also extremely self-conscious that I had to demonstrate that I belonged. And it should be that way, in my opinion. I mean, it's, so I was always aware and wanted to be aware of what, not necessarily my peers or frankly my seniors thought of me, but what Buck Sergeant Mike Burke thought of me, or a lieutenant in Charlie Company, or a platoon sergeant. I mean, that's the wheelhouse, and I don't want to say impress. I don't even want to go so far to say liked, but I want I would hope that they viewed me as the right guy at the right time. When a guy named Dave Grange was the RCO of the Ranger Regiment, I was a captain, company commander, and he used to tell, by the way, he was the inventor of the manga die exercise field problems for all the captains assigned in the Ranger Regiment, and he had a pretty steep Delta background, and he used to tell us that within that organization that kind of the ethos was selection occurs every day. And I try to internalize that. I really found that to be, on one hand, simple, but also very profound. And, that's why, maybe there was some hesitation, but, that's what whether I was successful or not, I tried to internalize that ethos also, and also impart that on the Rangers that I rangered with.
Yeah. I think that's a good way of putting it. And I appreciate you saying that, but just adding, kind of credence is one of the rubrics is, for a guest that come on is, we are trying to kind of cover, the span of, different generations of Rangers, but also when people make recommendations, and I'm constantly getting recommendations for people to have on the episodes. When I start to hear a name or I get, a message on a name, hey, you should have this guy on a couple times. That's when I'm like, okay, cool. That's definitely one person that we want to have on. That's kind of the, how we build the list. Cause I have a name of a lot of lists, but, a lot of names on the list, but, at the same time, I kind of use the group as a whole to kind of make recommendations. And so one, you made an impact on a lot of individuals that recommended you, you come on the podcast. And two, that Bucks aren't Burke. Yeah, you absolutely made an impression on him, in a lot of different ways as a battalion commander, from, cold ass nights up in Canada doing live fires to, Germany, after September 11th happened, there was definitely a lot of impressions you left on me. So, I was excited to sit down and have this conversation. And, you obviously having a counterpart like Hugh Roberts obviously helped too, because that guy scared the living shit out of me, but that was needed. And I definitely needed it, because I was kind of an idiot back then. But looking back now, you look at the regiment, as a whole, what are your kind of reflections of, your time and, where the regiment continues to go, and just kind of the impressions it leaves on you?
Well, I mean, a couple of things. One, I think the Ranger Regiment is, and always will be the gold standard of what, an infantry battalion should be. And I got it. The mission has become nuanced over the years. The profile and the Ranger operations have changed, but, and maybe I'm revealing how dated I am in my service in the Ranger Regiment, but from my perspective, at the end of the day, they are still airborne infantry battalions who, when called upon, better still know how to do a movement to contact or seize high ground, and just simply do it better and more violently than any other organization out there. And I know to this day they still can do that. And adopting our, the TTPs of today's fight, I mean, is where the Ranger Regiment is at the cutting edge. But I'd also hope that, when called upon to do something else, that, what you and I experienced together, a core competency, seizing an airfield, for whatever purpose, whether it's simply in and of itself a combat operation, or it's a NEO, or it's to establish, that airhead for follow-on forces. I mean, I believe, and I better believe, that the Ranger Regiment can do that better than anyone else out there.
Yeah, I agree.
Absolutely. It's not, I mean, it's really, the Ranger Regiment, since you formed the two battalions and into its current incarnation, has been lavishly resourced. And that takes on many forms. It's obviously funding, it's manning, it's equipment. I mean, we get, the reason the 2nd Ranger Battalion mess hall was so incredible was because we got authorization for a ration and a half per man. That means every Friday you have crab legs and steak, or whatever the case might be. And all of those things add up to a lot of money. I mean, just taking an officer that's commanded a company, and then he gets to go do that again in a Ranger battalion means a valid requirement somewhere else in the Army's not being fulfilled. Or the same for a former battalion commander that now goes to and commands a Ranger battalion means a valid requirement for that very experienced lieutenant colonel is not being fulfilled. All those things cost the big Army a lot.
Right.
And so we better be able to deliver when called upon at any place, any time. And I hope that resides, and I know it does, is still conscious in the forefront of the leadership of the Ranger Regiment.
Well, I think, I think a lot of the leaders, I think one thing that's helpful for them to realize that is Abrams Charter and the requirement that they have to go. I think the officers experience that, because that's part of the cycle. But now that the NCOs have to go out and serve in the conventional Army as well before they can be a platoon sergeant, and go back through the RASP process, I think it helps that because we've commonly termed it, the Ranger Appreciation Tour. As you get out there and realize.
Sure. Right.
It's a great recruitment technique too, because there's a lot of talent out there in the Army of people that belong in the Ranger Regiment as well. They just never been afforded the opportunity or had the person that could coach them to do it.
Here's an example. It was a little over a month ago. I went to Adam Nash's retirement ceremony / change of responsibility ceremony. And so you have obviously an incoming sergeant major, you have Adam Nash is departing, and then Dave Hodney, the commanding general of 4th Infantry Division here, is obviously presiding over the ceremony. And when those 3 soldiers step up to the colors to pass them around, on their right shoulder, all 3 of them were wearing 2nd Ranger Battalion scrolls. And that's for a heavy division.
Yeah.
So that's Abrams Charter and personified there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Alex Caprati taking over for Adam Nash.
That's right.
That's a superstar team right there.
Yep.
Yeah, that's good. Well, sir, the kind of final question. Well, I'll ask you 2 things. So I'll say, is there anything else, any other Ranger stories or anything else you want to talk about before, I kind of ask you the question that I just love to ask everybody that comes on to Legends.
Well, I mean, I'll tell you a story. When the company commander I had in 1st Ranger Battalion was this maniac named Dave Morehouse. And you really didn't want to spend any extra time around him. But I will say this, he certainly taught his lieutenants how to train. And I'd been in the company probably about 6 weeks before he showed up, as really the rest of the lieutenants had been. And he took over and he brought us into his office and told us, if I ever fire any of you, I will consider it a personal failure on my part because I failed to train you properly. Now, Mike, there wasn't a day that went by that we didn't think we were going to be fired. But to his credit, he did not fire any of us. And this is not one of these old Ranger Battalion stories, but I will say back then it did seem like lieutenants were leaving the battalions a lot more frequently than they did even when I was a battalion commander. I don't know what it's like now, but he was hard on us, uncompromising, and just wore us out all the time. I mean, let me put it in perspective. He'd been in command about a year, and we're up in our CPs, and all of a sudden a runner comes running through there. Hey, company commander wants all of you down at the company headquarters now, full up in all of your your field equipment, blah 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 blah. We look at each other, what's going on? So we show up there. He goes, he'd already had somebody pack all the rucksacks for us, and they, I don't know, weighed 70 pounds. He gives each of us a 90 recoilless rifle, and we just start road marching around Hunter Army Airfield. And we walked about 10 miles, and we ended up at a place called Lots Island, which is by the water at the end of the airstrip. And there his wife, who was a saint, has this spread of food out there, that could have fed an entire Ranger company, this gourmet meal. And then we sit down and we enjoy the food, and we just look at each other. This fucking guy can't even just do that by just driving us out there in a car. It has to always be something hard.
You got to earn it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and we did that day. But anyway, so that's kind of the company commander I had then. But we went on a company or battalion deployment to Honduras. We jumped into Honduras to do jungle training. And, the first part of it was all these live fires in the jungle were visible, or you could see like 3 feet in front of you. It seemed like it was just a torrential downpour the entire time. Everybody has heat rash growing on you. You're just filthy and disgusting. And then each of the companies had this different module where they would go to the water and we do waterborne ops and still live fires while we're out there. And Morehouse decided he wanted us to road march there because it would save us some time. I mean, literally about 12 hours of training time we'd gain back. And it also, if we started off during the day, everybody else walked there at night. And that entire walk was on this road that was uncovered. So you're just getting beaten down by incredible humidity and heat while walking during the day. People are dropping like flies.
I don't doubt it.
And we would stop. Everybody got proficient in administering IVs on that. They would stick the guys that were, feeling bad. Sometimes we'd put them on litters. We're going, hey, boss, can we start throwing guys on this truck? He goes, nope. We did not evacuate one single Ranger. We just continued over this road march to cross-load equipment. Some guys, the guy, them too, Mike.
Yep.
They're carrying 2 rucksacks.
Yep.
We're about halfway through this. We're walking with our K-pots. When we stop, we were allowed to put our patrol caps on. And I go up to the Morehouse and I go, hey, sir, why don't we go ahead and at least just take the K-pots off and put the helmets on? He goes, no, we're walking with all this equipment. And so we just slogged along and stopped when necessary, changed socks, gave IVs and cross-loaded equipment until we got to the termination point. We literally had, because it was the one thing it would not let people take off, literally had about a dozen Rangers walking across into the assembly area wearing nothing, carrying nothing other than a K-pot on their head. It was the goofiest looking thing I'd ever seen. It's like, hey, I can't carry my weapon, but this fucking K-pot's on top of my head. And I guess to me, it was my personal experience. It was one of the hardest things I'd ever done,
right,
as an officer, because it's not just, I'm sucking wind, but, obviously I got a platoon to lead also, but it was also never leave a fallen comrade. And we did not. We simply did not that entire day. And it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. It's funny that story, just how you get things in your head as a leader. And it's probably not a good leadership attribute, but like your pride, like that you want to hold what you said is going to happen. Like it almost becomes like a sense of pride, And I did, me and John Stahaley, so he was my company commander when I was in Charlie Company. We did this exercise with the Marines, and down in Sierra Nevada mountains at their mountain warfare training center. And it was interesting the whole time. Like it was just interesting training with the Marines and everything. We were the only Ranger company there. But we did the final exercise. And I remember, I said, the Marines give like this long, like, hey, if there's cold weather, hot weather injuries, like here's the evac plan and everything else. But you have to, and they were telling us like, you have to stay within these like kind of parameters for the final objective. Otherwise you're basically going to outrun the medevac and we're not going to be able to exfil guys. And I remember I told him, because we'd already come up with this plan of how we were going to seize the final objective 72 hours before they'd predicted that we'd be able to do it. And he goes, well, we can't do that because we'll outrun the medevac. And I was like, well, then we just won't have any casualties. And he's like,
that's a technique.
Yeah, right. Like we're not going to have any casualties. And same thing. I'm like, we're doing this and we're not leaving any Rangers. We're not calling for a medevac. I don't care what the hell we had to do. Luckily, Rangers, they're awesome. It was cold. It was cold as hell at night, and it was hot as hell during the day. Like, of course, just because that's what it needed to do, right? But same thing, like Rangers just like walking across the finish line, like seizing this last objective. They got nothing, somebody else is carrying everything for them, but we didn't have one casualty, and it was and the really, really cool part is we had 96 hours of retrofit on the final objective because we'd outrun all assets, all op4 and everything else. So it took them 96 hours to get everything else into position so that we could actually finish the exercise. So the last 4 days, we just camped out. It was like straight like a bivouac.
The rest of the military can't move at the same pace of a Ranger battalion.
They absolutely can, especially at night. Yep, you're absolutely right. That's funny. Well, sir, as we kind of close up, I have this final question that I ask everybody, and I really do love it because I think it encompasses so many things, and I'm always just fascinated to hear the question or the responses to it. If you could talk to all Rangers, past, present, and future, what would you say?
Okay, I know this will probably sound a little somber, and I touched on it a little bit earlier, but ultimately, at the end of the day, no one cares what you did yesterday. No one cares what you do today when the sun goes down. It really doesn't matter if you can't do it tomorrow. And that is, to me, means more than anything about an outfit like the Ranger Regiment. It's, like I said, it goes back to expectations. It goes back to standards. It goes back to the reputation, but it's not going to matter if it can't happen tomorrow. And people will know that. So, high five each other for what you accomplish a great life for or combat operations, but it means nothing if you can't do it tomorrow.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love it. Well, sir, if you would, what are you doing now, and how can people reach out to you if they want to get back in contact with you?
I'm doing, I think I mentioned to you, just a kind of a low speed contracting gig. Now, when I retired, I went into the GS service for quite a while.
Right.
And retired from that about 2 years ago. And now I do a contracting gig that sets up collective exercises for NGB BCTs. It gives me something to do. 90% of it's working from the home. And then it costs me about 30 days in the summer when we actually run the exercises. But that's kind of where I am. Not a big social media guy. I am on LinkedIn. So, someone wants to find me there, I think I'm pretty easy to find.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm sure that a lot of Rangers will want to reach out to you and reconnect with you. So, all right, sir, before I close this out, you got anything else you want to say to the larger group?
I do. I got two comments, and
right,
so Mike, this isn't for you. This is for your audience, which I'm assuming is about 7 to 8 people. But no,
my mom signed up, so it's not.
Okay, yeah. You probably charge her the dues too.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah. I want to tell people listening to this that Mike Burke is the Abrams Charter, in and out of uniform. And Mike, if you think about what you're doing, and you've done amazing things as a soldier, be it a Ranger or with 2nd CR, with the SFAB, where you lived Abrams Charter. But I would also submit that what you're doing with this forum is unbelievable. And I've told you this, and I've told a lot of people about both of your podcasts. If I didn't know you were a knuckle dragging Ranger NCO, I would think you're a professional podcaster. Your ability to facilitate a conversation with present company excluded, with really meaningful people, both with your other podcast in the civilian sector, and then with this podcast in our Ranger Brotherhood, it's remarkable. But it also shows what a Ranger NCO can do in anything he sets his mind to doing. And so that's the first comment I'm going to make. And so I'm going to pause while you tell me that I was the finest battalion commander you ever served with.
You were the finest.
Okay. All right. No, and the last one, and this is, I hope I keep it together here, but we lost a real Ranger legend in Ray Fuller a few weeks ago. And for those who don't know Ray Fuller, he was the civilian armorer in 2nd Ranger Battalion for I think about 20 plus years. As an Alpha Company commander, you get to know him pretty particularly well because his battalion arms room is in the Alpha Company barracks, and right down the hallway from my company CP. So I got to know Ray real well. And then, you know, when I came back as the battalion commander, of course, Ray's there. And I mean, my God, you talk about a guy who just lived, breathed, and did everything in his existence just to make a Ranger battalion more lethal. He would stop at nothing. He was available for everyone. You know, about every other month, I would get the, you know, we called them the Raygrams. It was, you know, he did all of his notes on the yellow 8x11, you know, legal pad. I mean, he did not have a computer. He would just write these notes, and he'd walk into my office with about 8 pages of just, here's the trends I'm seeing across the Ranger battalion. And they were must reads. And I would in turn discuss those with, you know, the leadership of the battalion, because, you know, he was just trying to make us better than we, you know, wanted to be, or in some cases. He went everywhere with us. I mean, he went on our first deployment and subsequent deployments to Afghanistan, I think Iraq. He would never be left behind, even if you wanted to leave him behind. You could walk into his arms room and eat off the floor. It was so organized.
Yep.
You know, he gave us a son. I mean, you know, Ray Jr. was a squad leader in Alpha Company when I commanded the battalion, and went off to be a first sergeant in, I think, 175.
Yep.
It was funny because I reconnected with Ray last summer, and I asked him for his dad's information. I said, "Hey, can you give me his email address?" And he laughed at me. He goes, "What's an email address?" But he gave me his address. So and this is, I think, about last October, I sent Ray a note, Ray Senior, you know, just a card saying, "Hey, I haven't seen you in a while, thinking of you, blah, 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 blah." About 2 weeks later, Mike, I get a 10 pages of handwritten letter from him in response to the piddly ass note I sent to him, just saying hello. So,
Damn.
yeah, he, you know, there was no prouder Marine than Ray Fuller, but I tell you what, second was his association with 2nd Ranger Battalion. So,
Yeah. I appreciate you highlighting him, sir, and that giving him accolades and the service that he deserves. So, because he was a remarkable man, and he became a part of the culture of 275 for many years, and he did some amazing things for all of us. So I appreciate you saying that. I really do. And I appreciate your first comment as well. I still disagree in a lot of ways, but I do appreciate the sentiment. So thank you.
Well, hey, my brother, I know you lowballed it with this one, but thank you for reaching out to me, and our service together is an enormous source of pride.
I agree. I did not lowball it, but I appreciate the modesty. So, but thank you for coming on the show today, sir. Kevin Owens, as he wants me to call him. And I know everybody's going to really enjoy, you know, hearing from you and catching up with you and talking about your time in the 75th. Thank you for everybody tuning in to the Legends of the 75th. Please share this episode so we can make sure that all our Ranger buddies know about it. Rangers lead the way.